The 1980s were supposed to be the decade when cars reinvented themselves. Fuel crises, emissions laws, and new technology forced the automakers to think smarter, lighter, and more efficient. But instead of brilliance, the era also produced a wave of shortcuts, rushed engineering, and decisions that looked good on paper but failed miserably on the road. Some of these cars were cheap but fragile, others were ambitious but unsafe, and a few managed to damage entire brands for years. And what makes this era fascinating isn't just that these cars were bad, it's how and why they went wrong. Before we get into that, if you want more such videos uncovering the real stories behind automotive, hit that subscribe button. And now, let's start with the car that turned the word cheap into a warning label. 11. The Yugo GV, 1985. The Yugo GV arrived in the United States in 1985 with one bold promise, that it would be the cheapest new car Americans could buy. Starting at just $3,990, it undercut nearly every competitor on the market. Imported from Yugoslavia by Malcolm Bricklin, the Yugo was based on outdated Fiat engineering and powered by a 0.9-liter, later 1.1-liter four-cylinder engine producing roughly 55 horsepower. On paper, it was basic transportation. In reality, it quickly became a warning sign. First, the performance was painfully slow. Independent road tests recorded 0 to 60 miles per hour, times of over 14 seconds, with a top speed hovering around 86 miles per hour under ideal conditions. Second, the build quality was an even bigger problem. Owners reported failing electrical systems, weak transmissions, rust-prone body panels, and interior components that broke within months. Consumer Reports later ranked the Yugo among the least reliable cars it had ever tested, citing chronic mechanical failures even at low mileage. Despite the issues, the Yugo initially sold in surprising numbers. In 1987 alone, nearly 49,000 units were sold in the US, and total American sales reached approximately 141,000 cars before imports collapsed. The novelty wore off fast, warranty claims skyrocketed, resale values crashed, and dealerships quietly dropped support. By the early 1990s, the Yugo wasn't just a failed car, it was a cultural punchline. Late-night comedians mocked it, movies destroyed it for laughs, and Yugo jokes became shorthand for terrible quality. Cheap transportation had turned into expensive regret, setting the stage for one of the most disastrous automotive decades on record. 10. Chevrolet Citation, 1980. When the Chevrolet Citation launched in 1980, it was supposed to represent General Motors' future. It was their first mass-market front-wheel drive compact, built on the new X-Body platform, and it debuted with massive hype. Motor Trend even crowned it 1980 Car of the Year, praising its packaging and fuel efficiency. Early sales reflected that optimism. In its first year alone, GM sold over 810,000 Citations, making it the best-selling car in America at the time. Then it happened. Within months, owners began reporting severe mechanical and safety problems. The most alarming issue involved rear-wheel lockup during hard braking, which could cause the car to spin without warning. By 1980, GM was forced to recall more than 225,000 Citations due to transmission fluid leaks that could trigger engine compartment fires. Additional recalls followed for steering failures, braking defects, and suspension problems, and the build quality was equally disastrous. Panels didn't align, interiors rattled, and drivetrain components wore out far earlier than expected. Lawsuits piled up, and federal investigators took notice. The same car that had won awards was suddenly being cited in courtrooms and safety hearings. By the mid-1980s, the Citation's reputation was beyond repair. Resale values collapsed, and consumer trust in GM's compact cars took a serious hit. What made the failure sting wasn't just how bad the car became, it was how quickly it unraveled. The Citation proved that awards and early sales meant nothing if the engineering couldn't survive real roads, real drivers, and real miles. 9. Cadillac Cimarron, 1982. By the early 1980s, Cadillac was under pressure. Fuel economy rules were tightened, imports were rising, and luxury buyers were downsizing. And Cadillac's response, the Cimarron, launched in 1982 as its first compact luxury sedan. The problem was impossible to hide. The Cimarron was essentially a rebadged Chevrolet Cavalier built on GM's J platform, with minimal mechanical differences and a dramatically higher price. At launch, the Cimarron cost around $12,000, nearly $4,000 more than a comparable Cavalier. despite sharing the same 1.8-liter four-cylinder engine producing just 88 horsepower. Performance was underwhelming. Road tests recorded 0 to 60 miles per hour times of roughly 13 seconds, numbers completely out of place for a Cadillac badge. Inside, luxury upgrades amounted to leather seats, extra chrome, and a different grille. Critics were brutal. Automotive journalists openly accused Cadillac of badge engineering, and longtime customers felt betrayed. Sales reflected that backlash. While Cadillac hoped to attract younger buyers, Cimarron sales peaked early and declined steadily throughout the decade. Over its entire production run from 1982 to 1988, total sales reached only about 130,000 units, weak by Cadillac standards. The damage went beyond one model. The Cimarron permanently dented Cadillac's reputation for engineering integrity, becoming an example of how brand dilution can cost more than it saves. It wasn't just a bad car. It was a strategic mistake that haunted Cadillac for years. 8. Pontiac Fiero, 1984. The Pontiac Fiero debuted in 1984 as one of the most exciting American cars of the decade. It was the first mass-produced mid-engine American sports car, built with lightweight composite body panels and marketed as both efficient and sporty. Early demand was strong, with over 136,000 units sold in its first year alone. But beneath the futuristic styling, serious engineering flaws were already forming. The most damaging issue involved engine fires. Early Fieros used a 2.5-liter Iron Duke four-cylinder, and a combination of connecting rod failures, inadequate oil capacity, and poor engine bay ventilation created a dangerous situation. When rods failed, oil could leak onto hot exhaust components, igniting fires. Between 1984 and 1987, hundreds of fire incidents were reported. In 1987, General Motors recalled approximately 126,000 1984 model year Fieros, citing the fire risk. Although later models improved mechanically and dynamically, the damage was already done. Public confidence collapsed. Insurance premiums rose, resale values dropped, and the Fiero's image shifted from innovative to risky. Production ended in 1988, just as the car finally became genuinely good. The Fiero didn't fail because of a lack of ambition. It failed because ambition arrived faster than engineering discipline could keep up. 7. Maserati Biturbo, 1981. When the Maserati Biturbo launched in 1981, it was meant to save the brand. It was Maserati's first attempt at a relatively affordable, mass-produced performance car, designed to compete with BMW and Mercedes, while expanding sales beyond ultra-wealthy buyers. On paper, the Biturbo looked impressive. It featured a twin-turbocharged V6, initially displacing 2.0 liters in Europe and 2.5 liters in export markets, producing up to 185 horsepower in early trims. For the early 1980s, those numbers were competitive, but the problem wasn't speed, it was survival. The Biturbo quickly gained a reputation for catastrophic reliability issues. Owners reported frequent turbo failures, overheating, oil leaks, timing belt issues, weak head gaskets, and chronic electrical faults. Carbureted fuel delivery paired with turbocharging led to inconsistent fueling, causing rough idle, stalling, and engine damage. Cold starts were notoriously unreliable, especially in colder climates. Quality control amplified the damage. Interior materials wore rapidly, dashboard electronics failed, and corrosion appeared early. Maintenance costs skyrocketed, even at low mileage. Automotive publications later described early Biturbos as some of the least reliable European performance cars of the decade, and resale values collapsed as buyer confidence evaporated. Despite selling tens of thousands of units globally throughout the 1980s, the Biturbo did long-term damage to Maserati's reputation. Instead of broadening the brand's appeal, it convinced many buyers that exotic performance came with unacceptable risk. The Biturbo proved that prestige and turbochargers couldn't compensate for fragile engineering, and once trust is lost, it's almost impossible to rebuild. 6. Renault-AMC Alliance, 1983. When the Renault Alliance debuted in the US in 1983, it arrived with rare credibility. Born from the Renault-AMC partnership, the automotive press initially loved it. Motor Trend named it 1983 Car of the Year, praising its ride quality, interior space, and economy-focused design. Early sales reflected that optimism, with over 100,000 units sold in its first year. But ownership told a very different story. Under the hood, the Alliance relied on a 1.4-liter four-cylinder engine, producing just 64 horsepower, paired to either a manual or automatic transmission. Performance was weak. Road tests recorded 0 to 60 miles per hour times exceeding 15 seconds, making highway merging stressful even by 1980s standards. Once air conditioning was engaged, power dropped further, a flaw widely criticized by American drivers. Reliability compounded the problem. Owners reported cooling system failures, carburetor issues, premature transmission wear, and fragile electrical components. Build quality inconsistencies between U.S. assembly plants and European design standards led to rattles, leaks, and early corrosion. Warranty claims surged, and resale values sank quickly. By the mid-1980s, enthusiasm evaporated, sales declined sharply, and AMC's financial instability sealed the alliance's fate. What made the failure sting was the contrast. An award-winning debut followed by rapid consumer disappointment. The alliance became proof that early praise means nothing if a car can't survive daily driving, American expectations, and real-world miles. 5. Chevrolet Chevette, 1981. The Chevrolet Chevette was never sold as exciting. Introduced in the late 1970s and carried deep into the 1980s, it was GM's answer to fuel crises and rising import competition. The goal was simple: maximum affordability. By the early 80s, the Chevette delivered that goal brutally well. With a base price hovering just above $5,000, it became one of the cheapest cars in America. It was also one of the most frustrating. Power came from a 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine, producing roughly 65 horsepower. Even by 1980s standards, performance was grim. Contemporary road tests measured 0 to 60 miles per hour times of 16 seconds or more, and passing at highway speeds required careful planning. The 4-speed manual and optional automatic transmissions offered little relief. Noise, vibration, and harshness were constant companions. Cost-cutting defined everything. Interior materials were thin and brittle, seats lacked support, and sound insulation was minimal. Build quality varied wildly, with owners reporting rattles, premature suspension wear, weak clutches, and cooling issues. Rust resistance was poor, especially in northern states, where body panels deteriorated rapidly. Despite the shortcomings, the Chevette sold in massive numbers. More than 2.8 million units were sold in the US during its production run, proving that price could override dissatisfaction. But reputation stuck. The Chevette became shorthand for automotive misery, a car bought out of necessity, not desire. It wasn't dangerous or scandalous. It was worse. The Chevette showed how relentless cost-cutting could drain the soul from transportation, leaving behind a vehicle that worked, technically, but punished its owner every mile. 4. Hyundai Excel, 1986. When Hyundai entered the US market in 1986, it did so loudly with the Excel. The pitch was irresistible, a brand new car priced at just $4,995, undercutting nearly every competitor. Americans responded immediately. In its first year alone, Hyundai sold more than 168,000 Excels, setting a record for a debut model from a new manufacturer in the US market. On the surface, it looked like a stunning success. Underneath, problems surfaced quickly. The Excel was powered by a 1.5-liter four-cylinder engine producing about 68 horsepower, paired with a manual or automatic transmission. Performance was modest but acceptable. Reliability was not. Owners began reporting transmission failures, worn clutches, faulty carburetors, electrical issues, and premature engine wear, often within the first few years of ownership. Quality control inconsistencies were widespread, and dealer service networks were thin and overwhelmed. Automotive publications that initially praised the Excel's value quickly reversed tone as long-term testing revealed durability issues. Warranty claims surged, resale values collapsed, and the car developed a reputation for being disposable rather than dependable. By the early 1990s, the Excel was frequently cited in reliability surveys as a bottom-tier performer. The long-term damage was severe. Hyundai spent nearly a decade rebuilding trust in the US, eventually resorting to bold measures like its 10-year 100,000-mile warranty in the late 1990s to recover credibility. The Excel didn't just fail as a car. It taught Hyundai how unforgiving first impressions can be when quality doesn't match ambition. 3. 1980 Chevrolet Corvette, California, 305. By 1980, the Corvette badge still carried decades of muscle car credibility, but the reality under the hood told a very different story. Emissions regulations in California forced Chevrolet into a compromise that produced one of the weakest Corvettes ever sold. While most buyers received the familiar 350 cubic inch V8, California-bound Corvettes were fitted with a 305 cubic inch V8, making just 180 horsepower, a staggering fall for a car once defined by brute force. The performance drop was impossible to hide. Period road tests showed 0 to 60 miles per hour times hovering around 8.5 seconds, slower than many ordinary family sedans of the era. Even worse, the California Corvette came standard with a 3-speed automatic transmission, further dulling acceleration and driver engagement. The result was a sports car that looked aggressive but struggled to deliver excitement. The cause wasn't poor engineering effort, it was regulatory pressure. Additional emissions equipment, restrictive exhaust systems, and conservative tuning strangled the engine's potential. Enthusiasts noticed immediately. Automotive journalists criticized the car for feeling disconnected from the Corvette's performance heritage, and buyers felt misled by the badge. Sales reflected that disappointment. While Corvettes still moved in respectable numbers overall, the California Spec 305 models were widely avoided on the used market, with resale values lagging behind their 350-powered counterparts for years. What made this failure sting was symbolism. The 1980 California Corvette proved that even America's most famous sports car wasn't immune to the compromises of the era. It didn't just underperform. It marked a moment when regulations temporarily overpowered identity, leaving a legend struggling to remember what it was supposed to be. 2. Ferrari Mondial 8, 1980. When Ferrari introduced the Mondial 8 in 1980, expectations were sky-high. It wore a Ferrari badge, offered a practical 2+2 layout, and was styled by Pininfarina. On paper, it looked like a smart evolution of the mid-engine Ferrari formula. The reality was far less glamorous. Power came from a 2.9-liter V8 producing just 205 horsepower, burdened by emissions equipment and an aging chassis design derived from the 308 GT4. Performance numbers exposed the problem. Contemporary road tests recorded 0 to 60 miles per hour, times of around 8.2 seconds, slow for a Ferrari, even by early 1980s standards. Worse, the Mondial weighed over 3,200 pounds, dulling throttle response and handling. Reviewers criticized the car for feeling heavy, underpowered, and disconnected, traits that clashed directly with Ferrari's performance identity. Reliability further damaged the Mondial's reputation. Early cars suffered from electrical issues, cooling problems, weak fuel injection systems, and fragile interior components. Maintenance costs were high even by Ferrari standards, and frequent servicing amplified owner frustration. Automotive publications openly labeled the Mondial 8 as one of Ferrari's weakest efforts, a sentiment that followed the car for decades. Sales reflected the disappointment. While Ferrari improved later Mondial variants with more power and better engineering, the damage was done. Early Mondial 8 models became known as the Ferrari you bought for the badge, not the drive. What made the Mondial 8 infamous wasn't outright failure, it was unmet expectation. It proved that even legendary brands can stumble when regulation, weight, and compromised engineering dilute the very qualities that made them legendary in the first place. 1. Chevrolet Camaro, 1982 to 1985, 2.5-liter Iron Duke. The third-generation Chevrolet Camaro debuted in 1982, looking sharp, lighter, and more modern than its predecessor. Visually, it promised a return to performance after the emissions-choked 1970s. Then buyers discovered the base engine. Chevrolet offered the Camaro with a 2.5-liter Iron Duke 4-cylinder, producing just 90 horsepower. For a car built on muscle car legacy, that number alone was shocking. Performance confirmed the disappointment. Period testing showed 0 to 60 miles per hour times ranging from 11.5 to over 13 seconds, depending on transmission. The Iron Duke was originally designed for economy sedans, not sporty coupes, and it struggled to move the Camaro's roughly 2,800-pound curb weight with any urgency. Highway passing required patience, and the engine sounded strained even under moderate throttle. The problem wasn't reliability. The Iron Duke was known for durability in other GM products. The issue was the image. Buyers expected excitement from a Camaro badge, but instead, they received fuel economy-focused engineering that clashed with decades of brand identity. Automotive journalists criticized the mismatch, calling the base Camaro underpowered to the point of embarrassment. Sales data reflected that reaction. While V8-equipped Camaros continued to sell respectably, 4-cylinder models were often avoided by enthusiasts and depreciated quickly on the used market. The existence of a 4-cylinder Camaro became symbolic of how far American performance cars had fallen in the early 1980s. This Camaro didn't fail mechanically, it failed emotionally. By prioritizing efficiency over excitement, Chevrolet created a car that technically worked, but betrayed the very reason the Camaro existed. In the end, the 1980s didn't just give us bad cars. They gave us hard lessons, tight regulations, shrinking budgets, and rushed decisions pushed automakers into corners. And too often, quality was the first thing sacrificed. Some of these cars failed because they were dangerously flawed, others because they betrayed their brand's identity, and a few because they promised far more than they could ever deliver. What ties them all together is that each one left a mark, not just on buyers, but on the companies that built them. Many manufacturers spent the next decade repairing trust, redesigning platforms, and relearning what drivers actually value. These cars are remembered not because they were rare, but because they were warnings, proof that cutting corners and ignoring customers always comes at a cost. So, which of these cars do you think truly deserves the title of worst of the 1980s? And is there another forgotten disaster that should have made this list? Drop your answers in the comments. Hit like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe for more deep dives into automotive history, failures, and the stories behind them.